for American Road Stability. My name is Mark White, alongside my colleagues Heidi Wilder and Zhe Yang. We are extremely pleased to be here this evening at the Virginia Department of Transportation, presenting to you our presentation on the future of Virginia's roadways. Now, as you all know, there was a recent change in how Virginia funds its highways and roads. And so while this change did meet a certain goal in terms of dealing with revenue streams for the foreseeable future, unfortunately, by abandoning the user fee system that has traditionally funded highways in this country, we really feel that it's moved away from what was a quite equitable and efficient system. And so we believe that the Commonwealth should reconsider what it's done right now in the years moving forward so that it can move back to that more equitable and efficient system. So to do this, we'll this evening, just to give you a quick rundown, we're going to go over some background over general highway funding, take a look at what happened in 2013 here in Virginia. Then we will look at two policy options and make our recommendation. So at the most basic level, what is the user fee here? Well, it's the gas tax. And the logic from it is pretty simple. You can't drive on the roads unless you buy gas for your car. So we tax the gas. The tax is then dedicated to maintaining the roads and the highways and for new construction. This has served us pretty well. And it makes a lot of sense from a fairness standpoint. You pay for what you're using, essentially. Now, at the federal level, and this is important to consider because the states are all themselves, seeing a number of similar problems. Right now, the federal gas tax is 18 cents a gallon. And it has been that way since approximately 1992. It has not changed in that time. It has not kept with the pace of inflation. And obviously, at that point in time, it was a much larger percent of the total cost of a gallon of gas. In fact, since 2008, we've lost $53 billion short on highway funding that has had to be transferred from the general fund, as this handy-dandy chart from CBO shows. And it shows that we are going to continue to have these problems into the future. Why is this happening? Well, simply we've had increased fuel efficiencies. We've got more hybrid cars, more electric vehicles, changes in vehicle weights and driving habits. The bottom line is that the gas tax is not a sustainable way of funding our highways into the future.
So now that we've seen the federal funding side of things, let's actually take a look at the state of Virginia. To make sure that we're on the same page, I first want to talk a little bit about the current status quo or the new 2013 McDonald reform. And we'll be using this general layout throughout the rest of our presentation. So first of all, we're going to look at the basic concepts, followed by the funding outlook of this policy option. Then we're going to take a look at the benefits and drawbacks, and then we'll introduce some of our assessment criteria into the entirety. So what exactly happened in 2013? So what Virginia used to have was a flat 17.5 cent per gallon gas tax. Now, what the McDonald bill now did is it eliminates this flat tax entirely in favor of a 3.5% per gallon tax on wholesale gas. And since this doesn't generate enough revenue or nearly as much revenue as that 17.5 cent tax, it also makes up this difference with a general sales tax revenue. So this moves Virginia further away from being a user fee system and makes it more into sort of a general funds transfer system. And this works out pretty well. So you can see up above here, the purple graph is the purple line rather, is with the new McDonald tax, the revenue that VDOT generates, whereas the black one is the one that was before. The revenue that was generated before the McDonald gas tax. And this difference is largely due to the fact that we have now sales tax revenue coming into VDOT. And there are quite a few benefits to all of this. So first of all, users aren't paying as much at the pump. They really like this. And since it's a percentage tax fee, it's more likely to keep in pace with inflation. There are quite a few drawbacks, however. So because it's a percentage tax, funding still remains pretty vulnerable to fluctuations in oil prices. And it's less transparent than it used to be funding-wise, and it's therefore less likely to be considered a user fee because those who aren't using the roads are still paying for them, such as senior citizens, for example, who aren't even driving. And some regions obviously benefit more from this tax than others. So, given all of this, we want to sort of assess whether or not the status quo is actually a good thing, and we're going to be following these 4 specific criteria throughout our presentation. So, we're going to take a look at the stability of revenue streams, the independence from federal funding, whether or not this funding method actually meets Virginia's growing transportation needs in the future, and lastly, whether or not it's fair. So, given all of this, we believe that the current status quo is problematic. So while, yes, the revenue stream does create sort of independence from federal funding, and yes, it does meet Virginia's transportation needs in the future, we're a little bit more iffy about the revenue stream stability given the fact that it is a percentage tax and oil prices have been fluctuating so much recently. We're also highly concerned about the fact that this funding methodology isn't necessarily fair. So overall, we believe that there are probably some better policy options out there that we should take a look at.
And so we're going to take a look at a few of those right now. First, we'll take a look at utilizing public-private partnerships and toll roads in particular, and then we'll also look at a possible VMT tax.
So I will talk about 4 aspects of the PPP toll roads option. So first of all, what's PPP? This is a very interesting question because in the common sense, most people just think the roadway are solely controlled by the government side. And, but in our case, the roadway can be controlled by the private sector and the public sector. So actually, the government side can have the joint venture with the private sector, and they can have the joint contribution for the roadway development. And how to attract the private investor to make the money investment into this business. So we actually charge the tolls for the cars going through the highway, and the private sector can have the revenue stream shared with the public sector. So in our case, actually the government also won't lose control over the whole highway construction. Here's our funding outlook. So the upside line is our PPP option revenue stream, and the downside line is our without the current status quo revenue stream. So in our graph, we can see actually our PPP option can provide with sufficient funding for the roadway development. And here comes our benefit side. So actually we can provide several benefits for the 3 major stakeholders. For the government side, we can provide sufficient funding for the public sector to have the money for the construction development. And for the private sector, the private investor can not only earn the revenue stream from the projects, but also they can bring the innovation into the development of the roadway system. So the innovation can bring in the cheaper and faster delivery into our business. For the society side, actually the PPP toll roads option can fix the traffic problem by charging the toll roads for the peak periods of the car going through the roadway. For the drawbacks, obviously the toll roads are visible. So the cars may be, the drivers may not affordable to accept this option. And for the society side, actually it's unfair for some families with low income because some drivers may be just not see their benefits from this option. And for the government side, actually they may lose control of the whole financing details from this option. So for the assessment criteria, actually our option can meet the standards of the first 2 assessment criteria. We can provide the sufficient funding for the business, and we can be self-funding. But for the last 3 assessment criteria, actually we are not very comfortable for meeting the standards because actually it's not fair for some low-income families. And also, it may be not sufficient to meet the Virginia state capacity, because in some rural parts of the Virginia state and in some other parts of the state, actually the private investor may be lack of the interest to bring the money into the construction of the roadway system.
Right, so now that we've seen that option, we can take a look at the VMT tax. Now, what exactly is a VMT tax? Well, it's what it says. It's a vehicle miles traveled tax. So the idea here is that instead of taxing fuel as we have previously, we will instead tax the number of miles the vehicle actually travels in a given time period. Now, there are a number of different ways that Virginia could choose to implement this sort of a plan. For instance, they could go on an annual basis by checking when cars come in for the annual inspection, check the odometer, last year's mileage versus this year's mileage, and run the numbers on it and bill the driver. Another alternative, and really the preferred option for a variety of reasons that we'll get into, would be to put a GPS device in the car that would actually track the number of miles that the car travels and then bill them accordingly. There would also be the question of how often do you bill? Do you do it monthly? Do you do it annually? We really think that monthly would probably be the better option, mainly because the idea of getting a massive tax bill all at once is probably not something that a lot of folks like. And it also provides more flexibility where the individual has more of an idea of how much they're driving and they can control how much they therefore are paying. The GPS device enables us to do this pretty easily, and it gives a lot of flexibility. Now, really, you could look at this similar to your utility bill, with a fixed portion of the bill every month, and then a variable portion of the bill, same as your electric bill or your gas bill. And the variable portion, the fixed portion is really not that different from a car registration fee. But the variable portion, you could do all sorts of things with it. You could charge different rates in different regions. You could charge different rates for different weights of vehicles, different road types. You could even do something about congestion if you charge different rates at peak hours for when folks are driving. Now, how much would this cost? Well, some sort of rough estimates, we could probably do it for about, on a variable portion, somewhere under 2 cents a mile, depending on how much folks actually travel, what the rates are, and what some of the specifics wind up being. But it is a feasible option from a financing standpoint to fully replace the gas tax and all the other taxes that are tied to highway funding at the moment. Now, some of the benefits, as we said, it restores the user fee system, and with its fairness and efficiency, it accurately measures how much vehicles are actually traveling and then bills someone accordingly for their usage of the public good of the highways. It also, the tax is not subject to fluctuation with oil prices, unlike the current gas tax. And those customization options that we already talked about, those are available for VDOT and for the Commonwealth's government to utilize. There are, of course, a number of drawbacks as well. Perhaps the biggest one is privacy. A lot of folks would cite that as being an issue of having a GPS device in the car. We do think there are some solutions to this or some ways to mitigate these concerns that we don't necessarily have time to go into at the moment, but we'll be glad to go into them a bit later. The tax is also a lot more visible, so you're probably going to see some more pushback than the current hidden gas tax. It's going to take time to transition to any new system like this, of course, and the issue of taxing out-of-state drivers would need to be resolved by Virginia as well. But overall, when we're looking at the criteria that we've set up here, it does satisfy all the conditions. It provides a steady revenue stream. It is self-funding compared to the federal government. It could meet Virginia's needs, and it is a return to the user fee system and its fairness. So, having gone through these options, we're prepared to make a recommendation here, and that is that we would recommend the VMT, looking at all of the options side by side. The status quo is unfortunately has questionable revenue stream stability, again, because of gas price fluctuation, and really it is no longer a fair system of tax. The toll roads issue has capacity and fairness questions as well, and the VMT meets all of these criteria. So based on our assessment criteria, we believe that the Commonwealth should reconsider a VMT. We know that VDOT has done this in the past, at least done some research on it. One of the big differences, well, first I'll simply say that, again, fairness and efficiency are the questions here. The user fee system provides those. The VMT is the 21st century solution for what we're going, for measuring this sort, how we're going to use our highways. Implementation will carry costs and hurdles, but it's going to be worth it in the end, we sincerely believe, and we think VDOT should pursue it. The other thing is, of course, unlike in 2008 or and 2010, the last time VDOT was looking at this, there are now other states that are involved. Oregon has a pilot program going on right now. Washington State does as well. Best practices are available as states roll out this program. So we would support a move to a VMT, and we'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Abel?
So I guess I'll be the one to ask the question. How do you intend to address the privacy concerns?
So one of the things that I think is just important to remember about privacy with a GPS device, if you have one of these in your car, you've already got someone tracking everywhere you're going. If you have an Easy Pass in your car, you already have someone, specifically the government, tracking anywhere you're going. If you have OnStar in your car, if you have, there are a number of services that are tied to this sort of thing. What they've actually done in Oregon is instead of having an actual government-issued device or a government-installed device, is they've opened it up to a number of private contractors and given consumers the choice of which device do you want to choose, which device do you want to install, and that's gone over considerably better, I think. They've had a wider adoption and participation in the pilot program because of that. It's only perhaps one step removed from Big Brother, I guess you could argue, if you tend to be concerned about privacy. But it is that step does matter to folks, and it is a real difference. So again, it will require a certain amount of selling, I think, but the fact is that sort of tracking is already going on with most vehicles that are on the road. And being able to translate that into accurate revenue streams and accurate measurements of where road construction is needed and what Virginia's actual, where the transportation needs are, I think is very valuable.
Not insignificant number of Virginia's roads are maintained by private funds. How would you account for mileage driven on those roads in the GPS system?
Sure. So, certainly there are a number of those, and I think that's actually one of the nice things about the private road system, or about the GPS system, is that the GPS system can track when you're on a private road and then not charge you based on when you're on there. Whereas right now, if you were to go and pay at the pump, theoretically you are paying for road usage that you're not actually participating in. Right?
Think about that.
I think the presentation, with the VMT tax, it seems like you're placing economic efficiency and the desire to amass more money for the government over the fundamental privacy concerns of citizens. I just don't see how, in the homeland of Thomas Jefferson and Patrick Henry, you're going to sell that to the populace.
Look, again, we're living in a new age. In the 21st century, the question of, we have to balance these things, obviously. Right now, anyone who drives through Northern Virginia, drives through Hampton Roads, drives in Richmond at rush hour, heck, drives in Charlottesville at rush hour, there are clear issues in terms of Virginia's road capacity not being where it needs to be. The American Federation of Civil Engineers has consistently ranked Virginia with a D, I believe, for the past several years in their annual infrastructure report cards. Something has to change on this front. And saying that you're going to, again, we are concerned that the move toward a general fund system really carries a lot of negatives with it that outweigh the positives from moving to that. And the new era we live in, again, of the internet, of GPS and so forth, it just makes sense to try to go to that. Certainly, the privacy concerns are understandable, but I think that once folks realize that, again, their smartphone is doing the exact same thing this device would do, I think that does tend to mitigate some of those concerns.
Great answer. Thank you.
Yes, you repeatedly stress the fairness and user tax aspect of it. I'm reminded of what President Barack Obama pointed out a few years ago, that none of us really exist in a vacuum. I may only drive once or twice a week, but I take advantage of the services that are brought in on America's roads every day. My professors drive in from home to school. I buy things in a store that were trucked in from somewhere else, but yet I'm not responsible for the roads just as much as everybody else.
That's calculated into the tax that you are then paying currently, yes, on the sales tax. However, with the VMT tax now, the truckers who are, for example, bringing in whatever food you buy, that is then being tacked on to whatever food you're buying into the price. Think about it that way.
The gas tax does the same thing currently. You know, it's part of the operating cost for the driver, and so they factor that into the price that they charge the consumer.
Exactly.
So really, it's you are paying for that use of the roads indirectly because you're using the roads indirectly, as you accurately point out.
Thank you.
My concern here is that in Virginia, especially with all the budget cuts now, implementation costs might be kind of huge for this. New computers, more state workers, maybe installing GPS in people's cars that don't want it. Do you have any estimate of how much this might cost? And also, would maybe rolling back some of car tax relief and using that for funds be an easier way to do it?
So as of now, what we're planning on doing is keeping the system we currently have in place. If you think back to the slide that I had where you saw all the revenue that was being generated from the general sales tax, our plan is to keep this going for the next 5 years so that we can use that revenue generated and then funnel it into creating that VMT, sort of a part of the government, so to speak.